I do want to move on to domestic violence because, again, this is a topic that has really developed less than 2 weeks ago, because the full bench of the Fair Work Commission has said that they're going to amend all modern awards, except for 3 at this stage, to have provisions dealing with family and domestic violence leave. And the immediate response from the federal government was, we will now legislate in this area. So we're going to see some real development. And I think it's quite important to see some of the findings that have been made by the full bench in respect of family and domestic violence, and how its effects are far-reaching, how it has real impacts on employees and employers in the workplace, not just the individuals involved, that there are financial difficulties, and that it is a gendered specific phenomenon, though men do experience family and domestic violence. And some of the statistics are quite alarming and make for sombre reading. At least 1 woman a week is killed by a partner or former partner. I mean, this is 2018. We shouldn't be seeing this. Some statistics: 1 in 4 women, 2.2 million, experience violence. 1 in 12 men, and this is I'm told, an issue in the LGBT community. You know, it's a significant issue. 62% of women who experience violence are employed at the time. So it's well and truly a business issue, and it is a cost to women and business and the national economy in the vicinity of $21.6 billion a year. And that's a huge number. The modern award term, at least what we know, it's still to be finalised, but what we can see is that family and domestic violence is going to capture violent, threatening or other abusive behaviour. So the behaviour is not going to be put into a particular small defined category. It covers other abusive behaviour by a family member that seeks to coerce or control the employee and which causes them harm or to be fearful. So it's quite a broad definition. A family member is quite broad, but it also includes a former spouse or de facto partner, recognising that there is this impact even when relationships have been finalised and moved on. And under the model provision, an employee experiencing family or domestic violence may access 5 days a year unpaid leave. Now this is to all employees, casuals, part-time, full-time, 5 days. It's not prorated, or it doesn't appear as if it's going to be prorated. 5 days a year. You don't have to pass 12 months service to get it. You've got it. If the taking of that unpaid leave is necessary to deal with the impact of family and domestic violence, and it is impracticable for the employee to do so outside of their ordinary hours of work. So there's some obligation there to balance business needs, but that's what the clause is at least going to look like initially, and it's going to be reviewed in 3 years to see how it's working and whether or not it needs to change to paid leave. So, welcome, Michelle. Sanofi has been on and has been working on many areas of wellness over the last 5 or more years, including in the area of domestic violence. What is the wellness program at Sanofi?
Yes, so Sanofi, for probably at least I'd say the last 5 years, has been focused on an overarching wellness program. It's got 3 pillars. And you mentioned with domestic violence, there's often a real financial impact. So one of those pillars is financial wellness or financial health. Another one is mental health, of which domestic violence sort of comes in under there, and then physical as well. So we do a range of initiatives under those pillars to make sure that people have access to financial tools, to advice, whether it be our EAP program, education around mental health. So particularly for managers around how to engage with employees if they feel that there is some mental health issues, what access they have to support, and physical, knowing that if you've got some reasonable help and some guidance in those three areas, then you're more inclined to be able to, one, come forward, and two, be more resilient if you do see or you do come across some issues. So I think it's one in 4. I think there's even some arguments that it's almost coming to 1 in 3 women with violence over the course of their lifetime, and that has a huge impact on all those 3 realms. And to your point around paid, you're more likely to have someone coming forward if they are in employment. So a financial security or being able to fend for yourself is a key element of someone taking that first step to getting help. And if you have got a workforce that is open to and has got some tools available, then they're more inclined to reach out to their manager.
And certainly when the Fair Work Commission was tussling with the issue of whether or not leave should be paid or unpaid, at least one of the original members of the full bench who was in dissent spoke highly of employers being able to develop their own policies. Now, at Sanofi, you give 20 days paid leave to assist people who are affected by domestic violence, and I think that's huge and commendable. What are some of the other initiatives specifically you're doing at Sanofi to address domestic violence?
So I don't think you can probably put a limit. We have, from a policy perspective, put 20 days, but we have, we've given more than that, when we've had incidences come up. So, for me, I think you could go well beyond 20 days. And where the leave's been taken for all sorts of reasons, to speak to lawyers, to modify their work hours so that they can pick up children. We've had people relocate state, and we've helped achieve that, to achieve sort of a different accommodation. So they've used it for a range of ways in order to deal with the issues that they're facing. So we've actually even gone beyond 20 days. So I think and it hasn't opened floodgates. People get concerned. Well, management. How do you put a control around this? It takes a huge amount of courage for someone to come forward, to begin with. And so, for 5 years, we've probably probably count on 2 hands how many people have come forward. But it has really helped. And what it's also helped is the children as well. So for every domestic violence, for every 3, 1 is having an impact on children. So children are involved. And I think if we can put some avenues in place to protect them as well, and that's important. So the leave is one. We train all our managers in domestic violence. So we did a survey. So we've been on this road for 5 years, and I would have thought we would have surveyed pretty well around, people wanting to assist, and we did. But where we fell short was, how do I respond? So what is the best way? Do you and would you feel comfortable knowing that you are responding appropriately and helping, a fellow employee, or if it's a manager, one of their direct reports? And the response dipped considerably. So yes, we absolutely want to help. We want to be there, but how? We're not so sure on. And the education has really assisted there, because I think sometimes the human response and the first response is not always the best response when it comes to domestic violence. And so that's really helped. So we do an education piece, and we've also partnered this year in a more formal sense. We've been a partner with White Ribbon for a little bit, but in a more formal sense to become a White Ribbon accredited workplace. And the view around that is, one, our CSR program, our employees really were affiliated with that cause, and particularly around our communities and trying to prevent, starting with our children, and making sure that we're putting measures in place there. But two, I'm also a believer what gets measured gets done. So part of that accreditation does mean that you need to be showing that you are educating the managers on a yearly basis, that you've got some programs in place that are maintaining that, and that's just not a tick a box, and we'll address it, in 3 or 4 years' time. So that's probably.
And how has Sanofi found engaging with White Ribbon in this process? Has it been a challenging process? Has it been a rewarding process?
So it's been, actually fairly straightforward so far. So from a policy perspective, and actually most of the criteria I would expect, and employees are expecting now, that they should be pretty standard in most organisations. So, employees are looking for what is your CSR program, do you have one, how do you, provide and how do you put back into the community. Our policies were pretty much already in good shape. The element I mentioned was around the education. We did almost like a survey initially to say, well, what is our starting point? And the gap for me was employees absolutely no problems wanting to help, but how is the best way? And that was the biggest gap. So that's, I suppose, been where we've made the biggest inroads.
And James, if I can just jump in, PwC introduced a policy as well last year, and that was one of the things we found, that it's really important to educate your staff so that the response someone receives when they first make a disclosure is appropriate. Because it, as Michelle said, takes a lot of courage to make a disclosure, and if the first response is, well, why don't you just leave him, that immediately shuts down that process, and the person thinks, okay, I'm not going to get any support here. So educating managers is really significant, and also thinking about what you can do as an employer through things like your payroll, access to emails. I mean, it's quite staggering once you see how pervasive the abuse or threatening behaviour can be. So some employees will be getting phone calls all the time, they'll be tracked through their emails. There's lots of things from a technology perspective that employers can be doing to make the workplace safer for women or men who are victims of domestic violence, but it's all about that pre-planning. Introducing a policy on its own is actually potentially counterproductive if you haven't done the hard work of planning and educating the people who are going to be in that first line of response.
That's exactly right, and the Royal Commission, the Victorian Royal Commission, found that to be the case, and certainly the University of New South Wales did a study a couple of years ago where they found that 10% of people who stood up and said to their manager, I'm experiencing domestic violence, found the first response to be useful. 10% found the first response to be useful. That is quite alarming, and I think part of the issue is, and you've touched upon this, Michelle, is managing the perception that it's a personal problem. Managers do need to understand that it's a workplace issue, and there sounds like there's a lot of great things that Sanofi's doing to break that perception and how managers respond.
And look, it is definitely beyond a personal problem. I think Australians, being the time zone that we live in, we never sort of switch off, particularly in a global organisation. You're always speaking to someone at all hours of the day. And I very much talk about work-life integration. So, and it goes both ways. You can't expect that someone's going to leave their personal, life and circumstances at the door. And they don't want to either. They've got a good community of friends and colleagues around them, and those colleagues want to be making sure that that person is, no matter what the circumstances, that they are able to assist in some way, shape or form. Every time we talk to people about what are the key strengths of Sanofi, and it's always the people. The people and the strength, the community that we have is key.
James, can I just make a point here? Because I think this is the flip side of it, right? You think about those stats on sexual harassment, on domestic violence. With domestic violence, you are also possibly the employers of perpetrators of domestic violence. And I think we've come to the view and we've accepted that if you are a victim of domestic violence, it's a workplace issue. We're still really coming to terms with this idea that if you are the employer of a perpetrator of domestic violence, is that a workplace issue? And when you think about some of the behaviours that might be exhibited, it's highly likely that they are happening in your work time. So stalking, massive phone calls, some of that behaviour and leaving work early, you are likely to know about. So I think employers in implementing this policy also are wise to think about how equipped are we for actually dealing with a possible perpetrator of domestic violence in our workplace. And I know we had a challenge to our policy, which PwC resolved by saying its leave would also be available for perpetrators, which personally I found quite challenging. But again, in terms of affording natural justice to your full employee base, if you have an employee who is the subject of an AVO process, do they also have access to that leave to attend court? And there's some of the thornier issues that I think we need to grapple with.
Look, I think dealing with domestic violence, you can get distracted by what's happening in the Fair Work Commission at the moment and thinking it's just about this unpaid leave. It involves a number of factors, and it may even involve supporting someone who is the perpetrator getting the right treatment to deal with their anger, aggression and the like. And if that could be resolved, and it might be due to alcohol and drugs or other matters, it would lead to a far better outcome for everyone.